Okay, today we will look at top risks in cybersecurity. And to help me untangle this topic, I am joined by Jamil Farshchi, who is the Chief Information Security Officer or CISO at Equifax. Hi, Jamil.
Hey, it's great to be here, Bernard.
It's so nice to have you with us. So you spent your career at the epicenter of cybersecurity, protecting the America's space program at NASA, defending nuclear weapons at Los Alamos Labs, securing trillions of financial transactions at Visa, and overseeing media properties at HBO, as well as leading security turnarounds at Home Depot and Equifax after two mega breaches. So you're the perfect person to have that conversation with and help us understand the cyber risks the world is facing at the moment. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Very good. So maybe you could give us a brief outline of your background and how you ended up the CISO for Equifax.
Yeah, I mean, I think based on what you just described, my career has been framed around coming in to organizations that are in crises and helping them work through that watershed moment and building sustainable programs so that they can manage their risks appropriately to both protect their assets as well as protect the consumer information that they're entrusted with. And it's certainly been an interesting ride with a lot of different stops and unique industries that are heavily reliant on security and cybersecurity specifically. But it's been really interesting. And I think that as you look at the landscape today, cybersecurity continues to raise in its importance and criticality on a global scale.
Absolutely. It's one of those critical things that have slowly crept up on the agenda, and it's definitely now a very serious board topic in most organizations, or in all organizations. So what within the cyber arena then still keeps you up at night?
Well, aside from the constant threats that we face, I think at a macro level, it's the impact of cybersecurity on technology. I mean, if we don't do our job well in security, like if the cyber crisis isn't reined in, it's going to hurt our ability to be able to innovate in basically every facet of technology. I mean, you can just look at historical events like the Capital One financial breach. That drove a lot of reticence to adopt the cloud, and those roadblocks and those hurdles impact our ability to be able to be successful and leverage the latest technologies. And if we do security right, then I think we, as both economically as well as from a societal standpoint, are able to take advantage of all of the innovation within the technology industry. And so I do my best, and I want the industry at large to be able to focus on this so we can all be in a better place.
Absolutely. So let's talk for a moment about the past year. I think 2021 was such a significant year in cybersecurity. We saw a record level of data breaches and ransomware attacks around the globe. Do you think this was an anomaly, or do you think this trend is going to continue to go upward?
Oh, it's definitely not an anomaly. It's continued to increase throughout. I mean, I've been in security now for roughly 2 decades, and I can't think of a year when it's really declined. And I think the reason for that is that the more reliance that we have on technology, the greater the cyber risks are. I mean, so like first, it's big business for cyber criminals. I mean, you take ransomware and the profit margins that they generate from that, it's roughly 98%. I mean, it's one heck of a return on investment in that particular space. And then you look at the organizations and their prioritization of security. They're largely still flat-footed on it. They aren't investing enough. They aren't prioritizing it to the right degree, and so it's a ripe area to be targeted and attacked and have breaches. And then I think that third is that cyber has more utility than ever before. I mean, to my previous point around the reliance on technology, it's a huge component of our economies and society at large. And when you look at things like the Russia conflict with Ukraine, cyber has become front and center because it is a meaningful and low cost way to be able to drive disruption for whatever ends you want. And so because of the criticality, I think that the risks continue to increase. And as a result, I don't think it's an anomaly. And I think we're going to see more and more of these types of activities in the future.
Mm. So one of the biggest headlines from 2021 was this cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline, one of the largest fuel pipelines in the United States. Do you feel that these kind of attacks on critical infrastructure will be the next chapter of cyber warfare?
I do. I think they're going to be more broad, though. I think we've moved more broadly from brand specific types of attacks, sort of the mega move to meta. And if you look at a lot of the major incidents from 21 and even the back half of 2020, they were more broad based. So if you think about the SolarWinds breach, they used a vendor, compromised them, and then used that as the launch pad to be able to compromise a whole host of their customers. And then we saw the same thing in mid 2021 with Kaseya. So and then you look at the Microsoft Exchange one, 30,000 organizations were affected. So I think that there will be more emphasis on critical infrastructure, certainly small to medium-sized critical infrastructure organizations, because they tend to have less emphasis on security. They haven't invested correctly, and there's a lot of impact that can occur from that. And so when I think, going back to the Russia-Ukraine thing, when I think about ripe targets and ways that a nation state could potentially affect in a meaningful way the United States or any other country that they chose, targeting firms like that, I think is a meaningful risk for us all.
100%. You recently released your list of top risks in cybersecurity in 2022, and we'll hopefully dive into a handful of those during this conversation. But to start, what's the one cyber risk that doesn't get enough attention today, do you think?
This is, I would say it's not actually some technical threat. I think it's actually preparedness, because it underpins so many of the challenges that we face today. And one thing I like to tell the folks that I talk to about this is that, you play like you practice. And one can never, and I speak from experience here, one can never anticipate exactly how a given threat is going to play out. But if you've gone through the steps to be able to prepare for it, and have that built into your muscle memory, then you can adapt and you can respond. I grew up in Iowa, in the Midwest of the United States, and it's an area where every spring we get a lot of tornadoes come through there. And so as a kid, even in grade school, you go through and you practice these every single time, so you're prepared for them. And then fast forward to college, when I was there one night there was huge threats of tornadoes all over the place, and I think there was 59 on the same night. And a bunch of my classmates, when you looked around, you could tell which ones had actually been through had lived in the Midwest and which ones hadn't, because there was panic and chaos everywhere from those folks. And those of us who had been through it before, we knew what to do, right? It was a different circumstance. It was a different scenario. I wasn't back in Iowa, in grade school, but I knew how to respond. And I think the same thing applies here. If organizations go through these steps and they practice with their board or they practice with their executives, then when bad things happen, the moments that matter, you're able to lean in and solve them in a very rapid fashion.
Yeah, so it comes down to the human element rather than the technology element that we need to focus on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So one of the threats that you mentioned in your list is quantum computing and its ability to bypass standard encryption, which will eventually open the door to adversaries to capture a broad array of sensitive information from governments, businesses, and populations. Why is this a risk today versus one that is still several years or so away from where we are today?
Yeah, Bernard, this one's really worrying to me. And I think the reason it's so worrying to me is because of what you just said. A lot of folks think that, oh, this is something we need to worry about in the future. And look, I'm not going to get into qubits or superposition and stuff like that. The bottom line here is that there are there are threat actors out there that are collecting encrypted data today, data that is secure by today's standards that would take thousands of years to be able to decrypt. But they're collecting it for a reason. And that reason is because they know that in the relatively near future, they will be able to decrypt it. And the problem is that the data that's being captured has a long shelf life. It doesn't lose its value at some rapid pace. It's not like a credit card number, for example, that you're just going to be able to get a new card and then you're fine. When you talk about national security information, even some personal information, it's highly sensitive. And so we're racking up a tab that we're going to eventually have to pay for. And when I look at the landscape in terms of what we can do about it, things like coming up with quantum proof encryption and things like that, they're too far down the road. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, for example, isn't going to have guidance and requirements out around this until 2024. In the meantime, we're continuing to rack up that tab. So I don't think that this is some future state threat. We'll realize it in the future, but we're taking on that risk today.
Okay, what are you doing about these things at the moment? What can we actually do? Even because if we can't protect ourselves from those systems, does it just mean we need to leave them open for future threats?
No, I think the answer here is a complex one, but I think the easy answer is we need to put more pressure on the government to make sure that we have standards and requirements out there. If we had those today, then we would at least have a fighting chance. The problem is as you know, it takes a long time to be able to drive change within this space because as an organization, if I'm going to go through and uplift all of my encryption standards and protocols, it's going to take me, it's not going to be an overnight thing. I'll say that. And so we need to get on the horse and get going on this and not continue to view it as this long run thing that we'll eventually get around to. Because if we take that approach, it's going to be too late.
Very good. So in your list, you also mentioned cybersecurity in the boardroom, but maybe not in the way people typically think of it. So how are board members themselves now at the crosshairs of cyber risk?
Well, board members, they're under the microscope because the courts have evolved to view cybersecurity as mission critical. This didn't always used to be the case, but if we look just last year at the Marriott class action, it was a seminal case in my opinion because at the conclusion, although they were exonerated in this particular case, Marriott was. The conclusion was that cybersecurity is mission critical. It is a core function of the boards of directors to ensure that they are providing the right level of oversight and so forth. And there's another case right now that's going through the courts around SolarWinds on the same notion. The challenge then becomes if I'm a director, certainly of a publicly traded company, am I spending enough time looking into security? It's a technical area. It's one that maybe I haven't focused on very much in the past because it's more of a sort of back office boiler room kind of function. And if boards aren't taking it seriously, they run meaningful liability risk as a result. And so I think we all need to make sure that our boards of directors are aware of this potential risk and they're putting the right level of focus on security, which in turn will help all organizations presumably become far more secure than they are today and put us as a broader ecosystem into a far better position.
Yeah, and do you see a future where they will be held to account, or maybe even CISOs to some extent as well, similarly to what finance directors are seeing if they have financial breaches of some sort?
At least stateside, there's been a lot of discussion around that, and that SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, is potentially moving down that path to make a sort of cyber SOX type of regime. So we'll see where that goes. But there's no question, as it relates to directors, based on the case law that we're starting to see, that the heat is getting ratcheted up. There's no question about it. And so it would not surprise me that if in the near future we start to see some meaningful outcomes as it relates to liability impact on directors by virtue of them because they're not focusing on security enough.
One of the largest cyber vulnerabilities out there today is supply chain risk, which you also include in your list. And I guess what you've noted is that it's not about the vendors themselves, but more about some of the antiquated processes of monitoring vendors. So why do you think companies are still in the Stone Age when it comes to how they actually evaluate the risks of their vendors?
Look, the risk of digital supply chain is monumental right now. And the challenge has been that you just don't have a great deal of insight into all of the vendors that one uses. And I think that if you look at it from a digital perspective, and what this encompasses is all of the applications, all the software providers, everything that you're using in a given organization, it literally numbers in the thousands, and sometimes in the tens of thousands, depending on how large the organization is. That's a lot to cover. And the problem is that today, the methods that we use that are sort of best in class or standard or whatever, don't provide the right level of visibility to effectively risk assess those. And as a result, you start to see things like SolarWinds happen. You start to see things like the Kaseya attack that happens. And they're extremely attractive targets for the threat actors. I mean, if it's me and I'm attacking a company, I'd much rather go through the soft target, which is the vendor that's really focused on developing their product and hasn't invested in security, and use that as my gateway into the big firms that do invest in security, because it provides me a pathway right in without having to jump through the security controls that they have in place. So what I think that we need to do as an industry is really lean in this space and hold our vendors accountable for ensuring that they're following the right security requirements. And at the same time, we need to encourage them to be much more transparent with the controls that they have versus a once a year assessment or a 10 question checklist that they have to fill out. Because the way the model works today, it's much more of a CYA and much more of a, hey, I'll just play the liability card rather than truly enacting meaningful security.
Absolutely. So cyber insurance has traditionally been a safety net for most companies. But you said that some companies are being denied coverage given the surge of attacks that we are seeing. When it comes to cyber protection, is the insurance safety net now gone, or what's your view on that?
I don't think it's gone. There's far too much money to be made in this space. I think what's instead going to happen is that it's going to create a paradigm of the haves and the have-nots. There's going to be those that have rigorous cybersecurity standards that tend to be fairly low risk because of all of the investment that they've made. They will get insured. And then there's going to be another set of organizations that is, whether they're flying by the seat of their pants or they just haven't prioritized enough, they will not. And as a result, you're going to really have that have and have not sort of paradigm. The bigger challenge is that historically there have been a lot of firms that have purely leveraged insurance as their risk transfer mechanism rather than invest in security for security's sake to be able to manage that risk. And that's somewhat concerning to me, because a lot of those firms in that latter category are the same ones that I was just referencing as it relates to digital supply chain. And so we'll see how it plays out. I don't think insurance is gone, but my hope is that with the more rigorous standards that the insurers are mandating, that it will help to serve as one additional one additional support point to be able to encourage organizations to invest more in security. And we'll see how it plays out.
On the policy front, then, you said that governments around the world are not making enough headway on cybersecurity legislation. What should be the top priority when it comes to cybersecurity policy this year and over the next following years?
I think, Bernard, there's a lot of areas where I'd like to see some improvement and some progress, but the number one is around privacy. We have a patchwork of privacy laws globally, some good, some virtually non-existent, and I think that variance drives a tremendous challenge for everyday consumers. Like if an organization is victimized by a breach and consumers are affected, to me, as a consumer myself, I would like to be notified in a rapid fashion. I would like to receive credit monitoring, the basic protections around that as a result of it. The problem is today is that those requirements are all over the place. And so I could, if I'm a victim in one state or one country, I could be treated completely differently than if I were somewhere else. And to me, I think that we need to standardize that because everyone deserves the right to be protected if they're victimized by breaches. And secondarily, the level of variance drives a tremendous amount of complexity on the organization, on the breach responder side. When I'm responding to an incident, the last thing that I should be doing is trying to figure out what the notification requirements are for state A, B, or whatever. I need to be able to be focused on the incident itself to be able to remediate it and make things good as quickly as possible. So the variance is a huge headwind for any organization as well because of the amount of time and complexity that's involved in it. It feels like it should be a slam dunk and easy solve, but it's taken a tremendous amount of time, a lot longer than I would think, for us to be able to get a law like that in place.
Very good. Let's talk about talent. You lead a team of more than 1,000 people looking after cybersecurity. But as you noted as one of the top risks in your list is that too many organizations are basically understaffed and overwhelmed when it comes to cybersecurity. What can these businesses, particularly when they are smaller businesses, do to punch above their weight and maybe attract the talent they need as well?
Well, look, I've worked for smaller organizations myself, mostly large, but I have worked for some small organizations. And I think there's a misconception here. Oftentimes, the lack of resources ends up being an excuse. The reality is that there are a handful of foundational controls that do not cost very much, that are just table stakes that anyone can implement, that will help you defend against 99.9% of the threats that are out there. Sure, there's some super sophisticated ones that maybe you might miss or not be able to handle, but that would be, in my opinion, a huge improvement over where we are today. So things like make sure that you're integrated in with your country's cyber government entity. So for the United States, it would be like CISA. UK has one. Australia has one. Israel, they have the equivalent of a 911 or I guess 999 for you for cyber incidents for anybody. So get integrated with those because they will give you a tremendous amount of insights in terms of intelligence and best practices and so forth. Make sure your software is updated. Just patch your stuff. I know it's sometimes annoying. I think about my phone and I'm like, oh, an update came. I'll do this later. Just do those things. Like make sure your systems are updated. Back up your important files. Leverage vendors that emphasize security. So things like adopting the cloud tend to be both efficient, help you with scalability, but just as importantly, they actually help secure your organization because you've got the power and the insight of an Amazon or of a Google or of a Microsoft being able to help you lock down your environment and that infrastructure. So if you do these basic things, you end up putting yourself in a wholly stronger place than you would have been otherwise. So for me, it's resources. It's important. But a lot of this stuff you can do, and ultimately it ends up feeling to me like more of an excuse to not do these things because of resources rather than a reality itself.
Mhm. Looking a bit further down the line, then maybe beyond 2022, what's one emerging risk that we will be hearing more about in the not too distant future?
I'm going to throw out a random one for you. And I don't know about the time horizon here, but I think the metaverse is going to present meaningful cyber risks to those who adopt it. And I think it will eventually. I think it will be a success, and I think people will be leveraging it quite frequently. And the reason I view it as a meaningful risk is because in the kinetic world, you can have identity theft, and it's impactful. Trust me. It costs a tremendous amount of money, and it takes a tremendous amount of time to be able to resolve that stuff. But you can still live your life. In the metaverse, given that it's digital, your entire existence can be wiped out through ID theft, right? And so I think there's a tremendous number of threats, especially as the metaverse gets adoption and it becomes more intertwined in the day-to-day lives of individuals as it becomes more of an economic engine. And so I think that's an area where there will be a lot of innovation, a lot of threats, but I think it should be an interesting ride as that comes to bear. What's the hardware?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is the one area I'm getting really excited about at the moment, and I've actually just done a few videos that will be released over the next few weeks on some of the downsides of it and some of the risks that come with it, and I think stealing someone's identity is important, but also pretending to be someone else, almost like deep faking someone else in the metaverse, is a real risk. I think that would be very interesting to see how we actually prove identity in the metaverse.
I completely agree. And yeah, deep fakes, it takes on a whole nother meaning when you're in the metaverse, I think. And I think there's going to be, I don't want to sound excited about this, but I think there will be a lot of sort of innovative types of threats that will arise over time. So it should be interesting.
Okay, so finally, what are some of your hopes or predictions for the future of cybersecurity?
I'm going to throw out a sensational one that's somewhat paradoxical. I would like to see more sophisticated threats out there. I would like to see companies that get compromised due to a sophisticated threat versus the ho-hum, run-of-the-mill, ordinary type. And the reason I say this isn't because, hey, I would love the idea of trying to defend against some crazy advanced stuff. The reason I bring this up is because most of the attacks today, even when they're framed as advanced, when you really look into them, they're actually not that advanced at all. And what it means is that organizations aren't even doing the basic things, those basic criteria, those things that I was just mentioning a minute ago. And if we fast forward to the future and we have a situation where we're getting hit with meaningfully advanced and sophisticated threats, it means that we've done the basic stuff. It means that we're at least doing the minimum level necessary to make it difficult for our adversaries. Like right now in security, the barrier to entry to being an attacker is virtually non-existent. I mean, anyone with a computer can become a hacker. And if you and I were to sit down, we could run some scans in 3 minutes and find open, vulnerable things that we could compromise if we so chose. And we need to be able to, but what we need to do is be able to minimize the barrier to success. And that's ultimately the challenge there. If you look at technology in general, and I mean, you're an expert in this, the barrier to entry to becoming, to starting up your own business and becoming successful, the barrier to entry there is not hard. Again, it's the same as security. You just get a computer. If you have some dev skills, you're good to go. The barrier to success, though, is quite high because there's a ton of competition out there. It's not easy to be able to just have a startup, which is why like 99.9% of them fail. As a hacker, no, the barrier to success is very minimal, and we need to raise the bar so that we are able to protect our organizations and make it a little bit difficult, at least, for the bad guys to win.
Very good. That was so fun, Jamil. Thank you so much for your conversation, and also very eye-opening and to some extent quite scary if you think about some of the threats. So cybersecurity is definitely such an important topic that we need to move further up the board agendas and do all the things that you've talked about and hopefully address some of those risks. So thank you very much for sharing them with us. Anyone who ever wants to re-watch this conversation or any of my other conversations, simply head to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much, Jamil.
Thank you. I appreciate it.